You know, every time you see a headline about the pay gap in sports, you're really just seeing the final score. But the game itself, that started over a century ago, on a playing field that was anything but level. So to really get what's happening today, we have to go back to the beginning. Let's dig into the long history of gender inequality in sports. And let's start with a voice from right inside the game. This is Amiria Larry, a former collegiate track and field athlete. And her words, they get right to the heart of it all. This isn't just about paychecks, it's about respect. Let's keep her experience in our minds as we unpack the story behind this fight. All right, so first up, from sidelines to spotlight. Because before we can even talk about the fight for equality today, we've got to understand a time when women weren't even supposed to be in the game. Think about it. Back in the 1800s, the rules were pretty clear, even if they weren't written down. Sports were for men, period. A woman's place was in the home, and being athletic was seen as, well, not just unattractive, but basically a threat to her natural role in society. The message couldn't have been clearer. Stay on the sidelines. Now, what's so telling about this timeline is just how incredibly slow the crawl toward inclusion really was. You see this tiny crack in the door with tennis in the 1800s. Then fast forward to 1900, white women finally get to compete in the Olympics. But then look, it takes another 36 years for black women to get that same chance. So progress wasn't just slow, it was unequal from the very beginning. So how did we go from that slow crawl to something more like a sprint? Well, after decades of being pushed aside, one single piece of legislation came along that promised to change absolutely everything. This was the Title IX turning point. So what exactly is Title IX? Well, it's this huge civil rights law with a pretty simple rule, actually. You can't have sex-based discrimination in any education program that gets money from the federal government. And that last part, that was the real game changer. Because education program also meant sports. And just like that, equality wasn't just a nice idea anymore. It was the law. You got to remember this year, 1972. This was not just another date on a calendar. This was a seismic shift. For the very first time in American history, the fight for equality on the playing field had the full power of the federal government behind it. But here's the reality check, right? Passing a law is one thing. Changing an entire culture? That's something else. Title IX was a huge step, for sure, but it wasn't some magic wand. Women athletes immediately ran into resistance, and all those deep-rooted problems around pay, resources, and just getting noticed, they didn't just disappear. And that brings us right up to today, to the lingering hurdles. This is where we're going to see how all those old biases are still shaping the challenges that female athletes are facing right now, in this moment. It's been more than 50 years since Title IX was signed into law, but its promise still hasn't been fully realized. Not even close. Those old fights are still being fought, and the most obvious, most talked about example has got to be the wage gap. And this chart right here, wow, it just says it all. Just look at the difference between the average salary in the NBA versus the WNBA. It's not a gap, it's a canyon. You have women playing the exact same game at the highest possible level for a tiny fraction of what the men make. But wait, because the story gets even more complicated than just men versus women. When you start to peel back another layer and look at how gender combines with race and ethnicity, well, those gaps get even wider. The playing field isn't just unlevel, it's tilted in a bunch of different directions for different people. And this table just lays it all out there. So compared to every dollar a man makes, Asian and Pacific Islander women get about 80 cents, and white women get 78 cents. But look at how these numbers just plummet. Black women, 66 cents. Native American women, 55. And Latina women, just 52 cents. This isn't just a gender issue, it's absolutely a racial one too. And what about Title IX, the law that was supposed to fix all of this? Get ready for this number. A shocking 90% of colleges are still not fully complying with it. Yeah, 9 out of 10. A lot of times it's because of loopholes and how they report funding and scholarships. So at the very level where careers are built, discrimination is still the rule, not the exception. So that leads us to the big question, right? If we have the laws on the books, why are we still seeing these huge gaps in pay, in opportunity, and in basic compliance? Well, the answer isn't just in the spreadsheets. It's in the culture of sports and in the real experiences of the athletes themselves. So let's go back to Amiria Larry. Here she's talking about a huge problem, recognition.
It creates this cycle, Men's sports get more airtime, more media coverage. That leads to higher viewership, which brings in more sponsorship money, and that leads to higher salaries. All while women's sports are left trying to play catch up.
And she points out another burden, this intense focus on what female athletes look like instead of just what they can do. I mean, that's a direct echo of those old ideas from the 1900s about sports being unfeminine. It's this extra pressure that male athletes almost never have to deal with, where your value is tied to your appearance, not just your incredible skill.
And this last point from her really ties it all together. When the resources, everything from the funding for a weight room to the amount of media coverage, aren't distributed equally, it's a systemic problem. It's not about one coach or one bad decision. It's about an entire system that's still built to favor men's sports. Okay, so we've looked at the history, we've seen the hurdles that are still here today. So the big question is, what now? Where do we go from here? Well, that brings us to the path to parity and what can actually be done to level this playing field for good.
So the way forward isn't just one simple thing. It's a whole bunch of things at once. First, it starts with speaking out, making sure people are aware of what's going on. Then it's about tuning in, actually watching women's sports. Those ratings prove there's a market, and that drives investment. It also means investing early, creating more chances for young girls, especially in minority communities. And finally, it's about building the physical infrastructure, fighting for better facilities in neighborhoods that need them most. Look, from being completely shut out to selling out stadiums, the progress for women in sports is absolutely undeniable. But as we've seen, that playing field is still a long way from being level. True equality isn't just going to happen on its own. It's going to take a conscious, collective effort from all of us. So we'll leave you with this final thought. The history has already been written, but the future? That's still up for grabs. The game isn't over. So what role will you play in leveling the field?